Daniel Harper sipped his morning coffee while staring at the Las Vegas skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him in a glittering, chaotic web of lights, neon signs, and endless motion. To any passerby or casual observer, Daniel's life appeared flawless. 38 years of marriage, 2 grown children, a successful business empire, and a home that could have been lifted from the pages of Architectural Digest. Every element of his existence spoke of order, stability, and success. And yet, as he sat in the quiet hum of his kitchen, a strange hollowness tugged at him, one that had been quietly growing for years. Evelyn Harper was humming somewhere in the house, likely tending to the orchids she meticulously nurtured, or perhaps reviewing the latest interior design magazine she swore by. Her laughter, light and melodic, floated through the halls, a sound Daniel had always associated with comfort and companionship. But lately, that sound had started to feel distant, like a memory rather than the present. He noticed how she moved, always precise, graceful, perfect in her composure, and yet somehow he couldn't shake the feeling that part of her existed somewhere beyond the walls of their carefully curated life. Their marriage from the outside was an emblem of success. Society friends envied them, neighbors admired them, and family gatherings were always punctuated with compliments about their longevity and devotion. People saw what Daniel and Evelyn allowed them to see: 2 individuals who had weathered the storms of time together. But underneath that veneer, subtle fractures had begun to form. Moments of miscommunication lingered longer than they should, shared glances sometimes carried the weight of unspoken resentment, and in the silence of their shared home, Daniel found himself wondering if they had ever truly understood each other, or if they were simply coexisting, 2 ships passing in the night after decades of familiarity. Daniel thought of the early days, the first apartment in downtown Vegas where they laughed over burnt dinners and danced in the living room to records spun on a secondhand turntable. Back then, love had been a combustible mix of passion and hope, messy and raw and completely consuming. He remembered Evelyn's eyes, bright and inquisitive, her laughter unrestrained and free. But life, he realized with a pang of regret, had a way of smoothing out those edges. Responsibilities, career pressures, raising children, they demanded attention. And in that process, the intimate, unguarded parts of their connection had slowly eroded. What remained was stability, yes, but also a certain monotony that neither had dared to name aloud. He placed his coffee cup down on the granite counter and allowed himself a moment to reflect. Daniel had spent years building his company from scratch, long nights negotiating deals, early mornings drafting strategies, and countless sacrifices that required him to compartmentalize his emotions. He prided himself on rationality, on his ability to remain composed even in the face of chaos. Yet even the most controlled minds could not ignore the subtle disturbances that whispered beneath the surface. Over the past months, Evelyn had become increasingly secretive. A late-night tech here, an unexplained weekend errand there, small omissions in conversation that now, in retrospect, felt deliberate. He told himself he was imagining things. After all, 38 years together demanded trust. But deep down, Daniel sensed that something had shifted, and the seed of doubt began to root.
The Harper children, now in their 20s, were living lives largely independent of their parents. Their absence left a quiet house that amplified every sigh, every creak in the hardwood floors, every faint laugh echoing down empty corridors. It was in this quiet that Daniel's mind wandered to the notion of perfection he had clung to for decades. Had he built a life meant to impress the outside world at the expense of truly knowing the woman he married? Could one maintain the illusion of stability while ignoring the subtle, essential truths that bound 2 people together? A soft knock at the doorframe pulled him from his thoughts. Evelyn appeared, dressed casually in a silk blouse and jeans, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. "Morning," she said, her voice light, almost carefree. But there was a flicker in her eyes, something Daniel couldn't immediately place, a hesitation he had learned to recognize over the years. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a shadow passing over the sun. "Morning," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. "Coffee?" She nodded, moving to pour herself a cup, the clink of porcelain filling the space between them. For a moment, the silence seemed ordinary, domestic, a comforting rhythm they had shared for decades. And then, without warning, Daniel felt a sharp pang of awareness. He realized that the perfection he had meticulously curated, the home, the career, the image of a contented, enduring marriage, might be more fragile than he had ever allowed himself to consider. The day stretched ahead, as ordinary as any other, yet Daniel could not shake the unease settling in his chest. There was a tension he couldn't name, a sense that beneath the laughter, the routines, and the polished exterior, a secret lingered. It was invisible, yet palpable, like the faint scent of smoke before a fire ignites. And as Daniel watched Evelyn move across the kitchen, her back straight, her steps measured, Daniel understood that something significant was brewing just beyond the boundaries of their shared life, waiting to disrupt the careful equilibrium they had both maintained for so long. By late afternoon, Daniel found himself wandering through their home with a restless energy. Photographs of family vacations, awards, and framed newspaper articles adorned the walls. Each image was a testament to their accomplishments, a visual assertion of success and happiness. Yet, as he lingered on each frame, he realized that appearances were only that, appearances. Behind the smiles, the accolades, and the neat veneers of their life, there existed a complexity that no photograph could capture. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt the sharp edge of vulnerability, an awareness that stability, no matter how long maintained, could crumble in the blink of an eye. That evening, as the neon glow of the Strip bled through their windows and the city throbbed with life outside, Daniel sat alone in the living room contemplating the fragile scaffolding of his world. He understood now that the illusion of stability was just that, an illusion. And deep down, he feared that the very foundations of his marriage, the life he had spent nearly 40 decades building, were about to be tested in ways he could not yet imagine.
Daniel Happer had always prided himself on noticing details others might overlook. It was a skill honed over decades of business negotiations, where the slightest hesitation, the faintest hesitation in a smile, could signal betrayal or opportunity. Yet, now in the sanctuary of his own home, that same instinct began to unsettle him, whispering warnings he had long ignored. It began innocuously enough. A receipt he found tucked behind a stack of unopened bills, small, unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. Las Vegas, the date, last weekend, Hotel Bellagio, room 1104. Daniel froze, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. He knew they hadn't planned a weekend trip. They hadn't taken a vacation in over 2 years. And yet, there it was, proof in black and white. At first, he tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was an old receipt, accidentally mixed in. But then more anomalies appeared. A credit card statement with charges he couldn't recognize. A digital calendar entry erased from Evelyn's tablet, leaving only a shadow of its existence. Subtle changes in her routines, the way she lingered on her phone, the sudden need to meet a friend for coffee, the way she sometimes left the house without explanation, were no longer coincidences. Each clue, insignificant on its own, now formed a pattern too precise to ignore. Daniel moved through their home with a quiet intensity, examining spaces he had never thought to inspect. Drawers, cabinets, shelves, all places Evelyn had kept meticulous order. And now, in the gaps between her belongings, he discovered fragments. Hotel key cards, a small silk scarf not his, a lipstick case that didn't belong to her usual brand. He felt like a detective in his own life, uncovering a story written in invisible ink, only now revealing itself. The emotional impact of these discoveries was immediate and profound. Betrayal is never clean or simple. It is a slow, insidious unraveling of trust. Daniel felt a complex knot of anger, fear, and sorrow. He was angry at Evelyn for the secrecy, but also at himself for not noticing sooner, for trusting so completely without question. Fear gnawed at him. Fear that the foundation of their marriage, long thought unshakable, was vulnerable, perhaps irrevocably damaged. And sorrow, deep and heavy, for the years he had believed in a shared reality, now tarnished with doubt. He remembered their early conversations, the promises whispered in dimly lit hotel rooms and quiet kitchens.
They had vowed transparency, fidelity, and mutual respect. Yet here he was, sifting through the remnants of hidden actions, each one a betrayal of that sacred compact. And he realized, with a twinge of irony, that perhaps the very predictability and quote-unquote stability he had cherished had allowed space for secrets to grow. Daniel's mind was a storm of questions, each one more pointed than the last. Where had Evelyn gone? Who had she met? Was it a mere indulgence, a fleeting escape, or something more profound, a connection that threatened to undermine the entire architecture of their life together? He remembered the fleeting hesitations, the subtle changes in tone, the evasive glances, moments he had previously brushed aside, now glaring with new significance.
The investigation became a meticulous, almost obsessive process. He checked emails, messages, and social media activity, each click sending a ripple of unease through him. Patterns emerged: late-night texts to unknown numbers, deleted messages leaving only faint digital shadows, and a series of weekend absences carefully disguised as errands or business meetings. Each revelation deepened the emotional chasm he felt between himself and Evelyn. Yet, amidst the mounting evidence, Daniel also felt the ghost of empathy. He remembered how the pressures of their life, raising children, managing careers, maintaining appearances, had constrained Evelyn in ways he had long taken for granted. Perhaps these secret excursions were her way of reclaiming a fragment of herself, a piece of the vibrancy and freedom they had both once possessed. And yet, the sense of violation lingered, a bitter taste that refused to fade. One night, alone in the dim glow of the study, Daniel spread the collected clues across the mahogany desk: receipts, hotel keys, photographs, and fragments of messages. The room smelled faintly of lavender from Evelyn's candle, a domestic scent now tinged with tension. He studied each piece, trying to piece together a timeline, trying to anticipate her next move, trying to understand her intentions. It was a puzzle with human emotions as pieces, unpredictable, fragile, and sometimes cruelly deceptive. The more he uncovered, the more Daniel realized that the facade of their life, the stability, the routine, the social admiration, had been built on assumptions, not truths. People he understood could perform roles convincingly for decades, masking dissatisfaction, desire, or rebellion. And now, confronted with undeniable evidence, Daniel felt the fragile threads of his world begin to vibrate, each revelation threatening to unravel the life he thought he knew. As the city outside continued its relentless pulse, Daniel felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The hidden clues were only the beginning. They were the surface signs of something larger, more complicated, and more emotionally charged. He was drawn to uncover the full story, driven by a need to understand, to confront, and perhaps in some quiet, private way, to reclaim a sense of control over a life that suddenly felt like a stranger's. By the early hours of the morning, Daniel sat alone in the living room, papers spread around him like fragments of a map, tracing a path through Evelyn's secret world. Every sound, the distant siren, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint click of a clock, reminded him that life moved forward as he felt suspended in the state of anxious anticipation. He knew he could not ignore what he had found. He could not pretend these clues were meaningless, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the swirl of anger, fear, and sorrow, a quiet determination took root. He would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. For the first time in decades, Daniel Harper understood that the life he had so carefully constructed, 38 years of marriage, family, and public perfection, was only an illusion. The hidden clues had shattered the complacency of familiarity, forcing him to confront the precarious nature of trust, love, and the human heart. And as the sun began to rise over Las Vegas, casting a pale glow over the city's glittering chaos, Daniel realized that his journey into the truth, and the confrontation it would demand, was only just beginning.
Daniel Harper's sense of unease had grown into a gnawing obsession. The hidden clues from Evelyn's weekend in Las Vegas refused to leave his mind, haunting the quiet corners of their penthouse. Every detail he had uncovered, receipts, messages, hotel keycards, demanded explanation, and yet the more he thought about them, the less sense they made. How could someone he had trusted for 38 years harbor such secrets? The very notion seemed impossible, and yet the evidence was irrefutable. He began the investigation methodically, almost clinically. Daniel had always approached problems like a puzzle, and this situation was no different. He started with the hotel, the Bellagio. The concierge, polite but efficient, confirmed that room 1104 had been booked under Evelyn's name for the previous weekend. Nothing unusual there, he told himself, but a subtle inconsistency gnawed him. The stay had included late-night visits from an unknown guest. The staff refused to provide further details due to privacy policies, yet the admission was enough to ignite Daniel's suspicion into a quiet fury. From there, he moved on to digital trails. Evelyn's phone had a password, of course, one Daniel knew from decades of shared habits, yet hesitated to use. Trust, he reminded himself, was still a part of this marriage, but desperation had begun to eclipse caution. Scrolling through messages, he found subtle deletions, traces of conversations with numbers he didn't recognize. Each deleted text left a faint shadow in the system, a ghost of communication that both tormented and intrigued him. It became clear that Evelyn had been communicating with someone outside their established life, not part of the family, not part of the world Daniel thought he knew. The investigation consumed him. Daniel became attuned to the minutiae of Evelyn's routines, the way she left her tablet on the kitchen counter, briefly stepping away while he examined it, the occasional glance at her phone that lingered a little too long, the minor inconsistencies in her stories about errands or meetings. Each observation tightened the knot of suspicion in his chest. And yet he approached these moments with restraint. There was a line he was unwilling to cross, a personal moral boundary he could not violate despite the growing pressure of his doubts. Friends noticed a subtle change in Daniel. Once sociable and composed, he now walked through social gatherings with a quiet intensity, his eyes scanning for inconsistencies, for any hint that Evelyn's secret extended beyond what he had already discovered. He found himself replaying their conversations, dissecting inflections, gestures, and pauses, seeking patterns that might reveal her motives. The more he analyzed, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the inner world of the woman he had married. Evelyn had always been elegant, controlled, and meticulous, traits he admired but had never fully understood. Now, those same traits seemed like a carefully constructed armor, shielding her from scrutiny, from judgment, and perhaps even from herself. Daniel's investigation extended beyond the home. He visited the boutique hotels where Evelyn occasionally stayed, discreetly asking questions, observing staff interactions, and piecing together itineraries. He refrained from confrontation, aware that accusations without evidence could shatter more than just his marriage. They could destroy the fragile sense of dignity he both sought to preserve and feared to lose. Instead, he observed, noted, and calculated, trying to reconstruct the narrative she had left unspoken. Throughout the process, Daniel felt a storm of emotions. Betrayal was the most immediate, sharp, cutting, impossible to ignore. Anger followed closely behind, often directed at himself for failing to notice, for trusting too easily, for believing in the illusion of stability too long. Yet beneath the anger and betrayal, there was a growing sense of empathy. He understood that humans were flawed, capable of choices born out of longing, loneliness, and suppressed desire. Evelyn's actions, while painful, were not necessarily malicious. They were human, and that realization both complicated and intensified his emotional response. Late one night, Daniel returned to the penthouse with a folder of findings, receipts, photographs, partially erased messages, and a log of hotel visits. He spread them across the dining table, each piece a fragment of a hidden narrative. He traced timelines, cross-referenced contacts, and created a mental map of Evelyn's secretive excursions. The room was silent except for the low hum of the city outside, a constant reminder that life moved forward regardless of personal turmoil. As he examined the evidence, Daniel became aware of the precarious balance he was navigating. The investigation was not just about uncovering facts, it was about confronting truths that could alter the foundation of his life. Every revelation held the potential to destroy or transform, to incite confrontation or demand introspection. He felt the weight of choice pressing down. When and how should he confront Evelyn? Could he maintain composure, or would his fury and pain override reason? Despite the growing anxiety, Daniel continued, driven by an unwavering need to understand. Each clue was a window into a part of Evelyn he had never seen, a fragment of her inner life previously hidden beneath decades of routine, domesticity, and shared history. And with each new discovery, he realized that the stability he had assumed, stable, predictable, safe, had always been conditional. It was a construct maintained by mutual assumptions, trust, and the careful suppression of inconvenient truths. By the early hours of another Las Vegas morning, Daniel sat alone in the study, fatigue weighing on his shoulders and his eyes scanning the collected evidence. Once more, the investigation had revealed patterns, glimpses, and shadows, yet the full picture remained elusive. He knew that confronting Evelyn directly was inevitable, but he also understood the danger of doing so prematurely. Timing, precision, and emotional preparation would determine whether this confrontation would lead to understanding or irreparable damage. As the city outside began to stir, Daniel leaned back in his chair, hands clasped tightly. He had embarked on a journey into Evelyn's hidden world, one that would challenge not only his trust, but the very narrative of their life together. The investigation had begun as a quiet search for clarity, but it had already become something deeper, a confrontation with the fragility of perception, the complexity of human desire, and the unspoken truth that had lain dormant for nearly 40 decades. Daniel Harper understood now that knowledge came at a cost. Every piece of evidence, every clue uncovered carried emotional weight, and the final revelation, when it came, would demand more than understanding. It would demand reckoning, courage, and a willingness to confront the consequences of decades of hidden truths. And as the morning sun cast its pale light over the Las Vegas skyline, Daniel braced himself for the inevitable, the moment when hidden paths would converge and the illusions of stability would collide with the stark reality of human complexity.
Daniel Harper sat alone in the dimly lit study, the night stretching around him like a velvet curtain. The soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded louder than usual, echoing through the otherwise silent penthouse. The investigation had uncovered undeniable evidence of Evelyn's secretive weekend in Las Vegas, but the facts alone were insufficient to satisfy the storm raging inside him. He realized that to understand the present, he needed to revisit the past. Memories came unbidden, uninvited yet insistent. He thought back to their first apartment in Las Vegas, a cramped two-bedroom space with peeling wallpaper and a secondhand couch. He remembered how Evelyn had danced barefoot in the living room, laughing until her cheeks flushed, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. They had been young, reckless, and deliriously in love, an uncontainable force that neither responsibility nor fear could tame. As Daniel traced the arc of their marriage in his mind, he saw a timeline punctuated by pivotal moments, both joyous and painful. Their first child, a son, had arrived after a difficult pregnancy, and Daniel remembered the nights spent pacing the floor, hand pressed to his wife's arm, whispering promises to keep her safe. The joy had been boundless, yet it came with exhaustion and tension that neither had anticipated. Their second child, a daughter, had completed the family, but Daniel noticed now how each addition had subtly shifted the dynamics between them. Responsibilities multiplied, personal desires were suppressed, and small resentments took root. He recalled arguments over trivial matters that, in retrospect, were anything but trivial. The tension over how to decorate the nursery, the endless debates about schooling, the subtle power struggles over finances and household decisions, all had left small and visible scars. Daniel saw now how these moments, accumulating over decades, had shaped Evelyn's choices as much as his own. The perfection he had cherished, the image of a controlled, ordered life, had inadvertently created constraints, cages that neither had named, but both had lived within. And yet, amidst these reflections, Daniel could not ignore the undeniable intimacy they had shared. He remembered late-night talks in the kitchen, the warmth of Evelyn's hand on his shoulder, her head resting briefly against his chest during quiet evenings. There had been laughter, tenderness, and fleeting, irreproducible moments of connection that no betrayal could entirely erase. These memories complicated his anger, introducing shades of empathy, longing, and grief that left him unsettled. Daniel's confrontation with the past was not purely nostalgic, it was also analytical. He traced the evolution of Evelyn's behavior, attempting to discern the points at which dissatisfaction had crept in, the moments that might have driven her to seek escape. He recalled a period several years ago when she had grown distant, spending long hours at work, arriving home exhausted and distracted. At the time, he had attributed it to professional ambition and stress. Now, with the evidence of her Vegas weekend before him, he considered that perhaps there had been deeper undercurrents, loneliness, unmet emotional needs, and desires for independence that had lain beneath the surface, unspoken and unacknowledged.
The memories were not solely Evelyn's. Daniel confronted his own shortcomings with brutal honesty. He remembered the nights he had prioritized work over family, the missed anniversaries, the forgotten birthdays, the words left unsaid. In his pursuit of order, of career success, of providing for a family he adored, he had neglected the emotional ecosystem of their marriage. The illusion of stability he had prized so highly had been maintained not through communication and understanding, but through assumptions, silence, and an unspoken agreement to avoid the difficult questions. As the night deepened, Daniel picked up a photograph from the mantel, a candid snapshot of him and Evelyn at a wedding years ago. They were laughing, hair tousled, eyes bright, unaware of the photographer capturing a fleeting instant of happiness. He studied the image, noting the subtle tension behind her smile, the way her hand hovered slightly away from his, almost as if she had always been negotiating the balance between closeness and autonomy. It was a minor detail he had never noticed before, but now it spoke volumes. Daniel realized that confronting the past was not simply an exercise in memory, it was an essential step in understanding the present. He needed to acknowledge the choices he had made, the compromises he had silently demanded, and the unspoken needs he had failed to recognize. He also needed to comprehend Evelyn's perspective, the way she had navigated desires, responsibilities, and societal expectations. In doing so, he could approach the coming confrontation with clarity, rather than allowing rage or hurt to dictate his actions. The study, once a place of quiet reflection, now felt like a confessional. Daniel traced the contours of his life with Evelyn, connecting the dots between long-buried resentments and recent discoveries. He recognized patterns, the early exhilaration of passion giving way to routine, the subtle frustrations accumulating into emotional distance, and the ways in which both had contributed to the creation of a hidden life, one that now threatened to disrupt everything. By the early hours of dawn, Daniel felt a fragile sense of understanding emerge. Confronting the past had not resolved the tension within him, nor had it erased the pain of potential betrayal, but it had provided context, a framework through which he could interpret Evelyn's actions and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. He now understood that the past was never truly past. It lingered, shaping perceptions, influencing decisions, and haunting the quiet spaces between what is said and what is left unsaid. When Evelyn finally appeared in the kitchen the next morning, her expression casual and unassuming, Daniel looked at her with eyes sharpened by reflection. He noticed details he had overlooked for years, the subtle anxiety in her posture, the fleeting hesitation before she spoke, the way her smile could simultaneously invite comfort and conceal uncertainty. He realized that the confrontation ahead would not be about accusation alone. It would be a negotiation with time, memory, and emotion. For Daniel Harper, confronting the past was a necessary prelude to understanding the present. It demanded courage, empathy, and ruthless honesty. And as he brewed a fresh cup of coffee and let the sunlight pour through the blinds, he braced himself for the next phase, the moment when all the hidden pieces would begin to collide, and the full weight of truth would reveal itself in the light of day.
The day Daniel had been both dreading and anticipating finally arrived. The sun had begun to tilt westward, casting a warm, golden glow across the Harper penthouse. Every ray of light seemed to illuminate the tension hanging in the air, a tension neither Daniel nor Evelyn could escape. He had spent countless hours examining evidence, reflecting on the past, and preparing for the confrontation. Now, the moment had come to face the truth directly. Evelyn entered the living room with a calm demeanor that belied the storm she must have felt inside. Her movements were measured, almost deliberate, as if she knew the gravity of what awaited but was determined to meet it with composure. Daniel's eyes studied her carefully, the tilt of her head, the quick flicker of uncertainty in her gaze, the way her fingers twisted the edge of a napkin. Every detail spoke volumes, conveying hesitation, apprehension, and perhaps a hint of regret. "Daniel," she said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried the familiar warmth he had once found so comforting, now tinged with apprehension. "I suppose you know why I need to speak with you." Daniel nodded, a tight knot forming in his chest. "I found the receipts, the messages, the hotel bookings, The weekend in Vegas. Evelyn, I need to understand why. For a moment, she said nothing, simply meeting his gaze with a mixture of vulnerability and defiance. Then slowly, she sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. The pause was deliberate, a breath held between confession and concealment. It's complicated. It wasn't just about the trip or him. It was about me too, about what I've been feeling, what I've been missing. Daniel leaned back, letting the words settle, but bracing himself for the truth. Explain, he said simply, his tone neutral, though every muscle in his body was taut with anticipation. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she spoke. She recounted long periods of isolation despite living in the midst of a bustling city, moments when she felt unseen, unheard, and invisible in a life they had built together. She spoke of unfulfilled desires, not just for adventure, but for attention, for affirmation, for experiences that made her feel alive beyond her roles as wife, mother, and social figure. The Vegas trip, she admitted, had been impulsive, a brief reclamation of autonomy, a flirtation with the person she had once been before the weight of responsibilities transformed her existence. The revelation was a maelstrom. Daniel felt anger surge, raw and immediate, yet it was tempered by a strange, reluctant understanding. Evelyn's honesty, even in its painful details, illuminated a complexity he had long ignored. She had not merely hidden from him, she had hidden from herself, navigating the constraints of expectation, habit, and societal scrutiny. And in doing so, she had created a fracture that now demanded confrontation.
You didn't tell me because... Daniel began, searching for clarity. Because I was ashamed, she interrupted, voice trembling. I was afraid of what it would do to us. I thought I could contain it, manage it, but I couldn't. I wanted something that was mine alone, even if only for a weekend. Daniel felt the room shrink, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. He saw the truth in her eyes, the vulnerability, the guilt, the raw honesty that contrasted sharply with the controlled image she had always projected. And in that moment, he realized that the revelation was not just about betrayal, it was about the human need for recognition, for freedom, and for emotional survival. He struggled to process the emotional complexity. The anger remained, simmering beneath the surface, but now accompanied by empathy, sorrow, and even love. Evelyn's actions, while hurtful, were human. They were the product of decades of silence, compromise, and unspoken dissatisfaction. The revelation forced him to confront his own complicity, the ways in which he had prioritized routine, stability, and public perception over intimacy and understanding. Daniel asked questions, measured yet pointed, seeking to understand the depth and nature of Evelyn's encounters. Each answer revealed nuances, fleeting moments of connection, instances of shared laughter, but no betrayal of emotional fidelity. She had acted impulsively, driven by desire, curiosity, and the need to reclaim parts of herself she felt had been lost. The truth, while shocking, was neither simple nor malicious. It was human, messy, and profoundly complicated. By the end of the conversation, both sat in a tense silence, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. The room felt charged, every object in shadow amplifying the emotions between them. Daniel understood that knowing the truth was not the same as forgiving it, and that processing it would take time, reflection, and courage. Yet there was a strange clarity that had emerged, a recognition that their lives, while disrupted, were not irreparably broken. He looked at Evelyn and saw the person he had loved for decades. The same face, softened by age, still familiar, yet now bearing the marks of a secret world. He saw her vulnerability, her humanity, and the courage it took to reveal what she had hidden for so long. And in that recognition, he felt the first stirrings of understanding, a foundation upon which dialogue, reconciliation, or at least comprehension might be built. As the sun dipped lower over Las Vegas,
casting long shadows across the room, Daniel Harper realized that the revelation had changed everything and nothing. The facts were now known, the secrets laid bare, but the path forward remained uncertain. Their marriage, tested and strained, would require honesty, empathy, and the courage to navigate the intricate terrain of desire, expectation, and love. For the first time in decades, Daniel felt the sharp edge of awareness. Understanding Evelyn's hidden life did not erase the past, nor did it provide answers to the future. It was a starting point, a moment where reality collided with perception and where the choices they made next would define the next chapter of their lives. And as they sat across from each other, shadows dancing across the walls, Daniel understood that the revelation was not an end, but a reckoning.
The revelation hung over the Harper penthouse like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. Daniel felt the air itself charged with tension, each breath a struggle between anger, sorrow, and the remnants of love he still clung to. Evelyn sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles white, eyes wide yet brimming with tears she refused to shed. Neither spoke for long moments, as though the weight of unspoken words had filled the space entirely. Daniel's mind was a tempest. Betrayal gnawed at him relentlessly, each memory of their life together now shadowed by doubt. He recalled mornings spent sharing coffee, evenings laughing over small domestic victories, decades of shared routines now tainted by the knowledge of her secret escape. Every gesture, every smile he had cherished, now carried a subtle question. Had any of it been real, or had it merely been performance? Evelyn's voice, when it finally emerged, was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could manage it, contain it, but I was wrong." Her confession was simple, yet it carried the weight of years, unspoken desires, and silent guilt. Daniel could see the turmoil etched into her face, the vulnerability of someone who had crossed a boundary she had once considered inviolate. For a long moment, silence dominated. Then Daniel spoke, his voice low, measured but trembling with the force of restrained emotion. "Do you understand what this does to me? To everything we've built?" His words were not accusatory, they were a reflection, a grappling with reality, but the edge in his tone betrayed the storm inside. Evelyn nodded, biting her lip as tears threatened to spill. I know it's devastating, and I accept that. I wanted you to understand why it happened, not as an excuse, but so you could see it as part of me, not just a betrayal." Daniel rose and began pacing the room, the polished floors reflecting his movements in fractured fragments. His mind raced, memories interwoven with new truths, anger clashing with empathy, sorrow mingling with love. The emotional storm within him mirrored the chaos of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He remembered every compromise, every overlooked need, every silence that had grown into a canyon between them. And now, confronted with Evelyn's honesty, he felt the full force of decades of suppressed emotions crashing down. "You went to Las Vegas," he said finally, voice tighter than before. "You didn't just step away for a day. You created a world I didn't know existed. For what? A few hours of feeling alive?" His words were harsh, yet beneath them was a profound grief, a sense of loss that seemed impossible to articulate. Evelyn swallowed hard. "It wasn't about him, Daniel. It was about me. About being someone I used to be. Someone I've lost to obligations, expectations, routines. I never stopped loving you. I just needed to feel something else. Something I had forgotten I could feel." Her confession trembled with sincerity, exposing raw vulnerability that even Daniel could not ignore. Daniel's emotions surged. Rage battled with longing, betrayal tangled with empathy. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, a physical manifestation of the internal tempest. For decades, he had prided himself on control, on understanding the intricate mechanics of human behavior. Now he realized that no amount of analysis could simplify the messiness of human desire, the unpredictability of emotion, or the complexity of love entwined with imperfection. He stopped pacing, standing near the window, staring out at the sprawling Las Vegas skyline. The city shimmered in gold and crimson, vibrant, chaotic, and indifferent, an apt reflection of the emotional turbulence in his own heart. "I don't know if I can just forgive," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. "I don't know if I even want to. But I can't just walk away. Not yet. Not after everything." Evelyn reached out, her fingers hovering near his hand, but not quite touching. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," she said softly. "I only ask that you try to understand me, that we talk, really talk, about what we've lost, what we want, and what we need. If we can do that, maybe we can find a way through this." Daniel turned to look at her, seeing not just the woman who had hurt him, but the human being who had made a choice born of fear, longing, and suppressed desire. The storm in his heart began to shift, from pure fury to a complex mixture of grief, compassion, and reluctant hope. He realized that reconciliation would not come from forgetting or excusing what had happened, but from acknowledging the truth, understanding its roots, and deciding how to move forward with intention and honesty. He sank onto the couch beside her, the tension still palpable but now tempered with a fragile calm. "This won't be easy. It's going to take time. It's going to take honesty and courage. I can't promise I'll ever forget, but I want to try to understand. I want us to at least try." Evelyn's lips trembled into a tentative smile, tears spilling freely now. "That's all I ask," she whispered softly. "We've spent 38 years building a life together. I don't want to throw it away over a mistake, over a moment of weakness. I want to fight for us, if you will." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of the storm in his chest easing slightly. He understood that the coming days, weeks, and months would be fraught with difficulty, with moments of doubt, anger, and frustration. But for the first time since discovering her secret, he felt the faint stirrings of possibility, the chance to rebuild trust, to confront the pain honestly, and perhaps to rediscover the connection that had always underpinned their shared life. The emotional storm did not dissipate entirely that evening, nor did it promise to vanish soon. But as they sat together, hands finally intertwined, Daniel recognized that storms, though destructive, could also cleanse, reset, and illuminate the path forward. And in that fragile moment of shared vulnerability, he realized that their marriage, tested, strained, and imperfect, might yet endure, transformed by honesty, understanding, and the courage to face what had long been hidden. The morning after the storm had passed, Daniel Harper awoke to a quiet penthouse, sunlight spilling across the polished floors in streaks of amber. The city outside pulsed with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the turmoil that had unfolded behind these walls. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, considering the choices that lay ahead. The revelation, the confrontation, and the emotional storm had left a raw, unhealed landscape within him, a landscape that demanded careful navigation, thoughtful reflection, and courageous decisions. Evelyn entered the bedroom quietly, dressed in a soft blouse and slacks, her hair loosely tied back. Her expression was tentative, reflective, yet hopeful. Daniel looked at her and, for the first time in days, the fury and suspicion that had dominated his thoughts were tempered by an awareness of their shared history, the depth of their connection, and the complexity of human desire. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice steady but calm. "Not about the past alone, but about the future, about what we want, and what we're willing to do to preserve or redefine this marriage." Evelyn nodded. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted, moving closer and sitting beside him. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't even expect us to go back to how things were. But I do want to find a way forward, together if possible, but honestly." Daniel took a deep breath, allowing himself to feel the gravity of the situation. They had nearly 40 decades of shared life. Memories, children, routines, habits, and investments that went beyond the material.
To discard all of that over a weekend of secrecy seemed reckless, and yet to continue blindly without addressing the fracture would be equally perilous. They needed a path forward, one founded on transparency, introspection, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. "I've been reflecting," Daniel began, "on how we got here, on how routine, expectations, and silence created gaps we didn't acknowledge, on how I too contributed to a sense of distance between us. And I realize now that if we want to move forward, it has to be honest about what went wrong, what we need, and what we're willing to change." Evelyn listened intently, the faintest tremor in her hand betraying her own anxiety. "I've thought the same thing," she said softly. "I don't want to hide parts of myself anymore. I don't want us to exist side by side without truly seeing each other. We have to rebuild trust, but not blindly. We have to understand each other, respect each other, and allow for growth, even if it's uncomfortable." They spent hours talking, not in the perfunctory, surface-level way they had sometimes done, but deeply, honestly. They revisited years of decisions, unspoken resentments, and suppressed desires. Daniel spoke of his own failings, prioritizing work over presence, valuing stability over spontaneity, and occasionally missing opportunities to truly connect with Evelyn on a deeper emotional level. Evelyn admitted to her own loneliness, the longing for autonomy, and the temporary choices she had made to reclaim parts of herself she feared were lost forever. The conversation was punctuated by pauses, reflective silence, and moments of mutual vulnerability. Neither sought to dominate or condemn. Instead, they sought understanding. Every acknowledgement, every confession, every shared memory acted as a thread, weaving a delicate tapestry of connection in the wake of disruption. Daniel realized that choosing a path forward was not about absolution or erasing mistakes. It was about deliberate intention, deciding whether to repair the fractures, rebuild trust, and engage in the work required for a marriage to survive a profound crisis. It was about negotiating boundaries, reestablishing communication, and cultivating empathy in ways they had neglected for decades. By late afternoon, they agreed on practical steps, counseling sessions to explore emotional wounds, transparent sharing of schedules and social interactions, and deliberate time spent reconnecting without distraction. They decided to create small rituals of trust, shared meals without phones, evenings dedicated to conversation and the acknowledgement of desires that had long been left unspoken. These were not guarantees, but they were commitments, symbols of their willingness to confront the past while shaping a deliberate future. Evelyn reached for Daniel's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it won't be easy," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor of emotion beneath, "but I'm willing to try if you are. I want us to emerge from this stronger, not just survivors of a mistake, but partners who truly understand each other." Daniel looked at her, the storm inside him having calmed to a fragile, reflective stillness. "I want that too," he replied. "It won't be quick, and it won't be perfect, but I think we can do it, together." In that moment, they acknowledged a fundamental truth. The path forward would require patience, humility, and a willingness to face discomfort. It would involve confronting emotions that were raw and unresolved, revisiting the hidden fractures of their past, and embracing the complexity of love intertwined with human imperfection. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was a quiet hope, a recognition that intention, honesty, and shared commitment could guide them toward reconciliation. As the evening light deepened into twilight, Daniel and Evelyn sat together in the quiet of their penthouse. The city hummed beyond the glass walls, vibrant and indifferent, a reminder that life moved relentlessly forward. And while the memories of betrayal lingered, they also understood that the choices they made now, intentional, honest, courageous, would define not only the survival of their marriage, but the quality of the life they would continue to build together. For Daniel Harper, choosing a path forward meant confronting reality without illusion, embracing complexity without fear, and committing to action grounded in both empathy and resolve. It was not a guarantee of happiness, nor a shield from future challenges, but it was a deliberate step toward reclaiming connection, trust, and a sense of shared purpose. And as they held hands, the silence between them no longer oppressive, Daniel felt a cautious optimism that love, though tested and scarred, could endure, that the past, while immutable, could inform a future shaped by honesty, understanding, and the conscious choice to move forward together.
Weeks had passed since the storm that had shaken the Harper marriage to its core. The initial shock of revelation had given way to reflection, confrontation, and a tentative negotiation of boundaries. Daniel and Evelyn had followed through with their commitment to honesty, therapy sessions, transparent schedules, and deliberate moments of reconnection. The emotional landscape of their lives remained complex, but a fragile equilibrium had begun to emerge, a delicate dance between trust rebuilt and scars unhealed. Daniel found himself waking earlier than usual, walking through the apartment in silence, noticing details he had previously taken for granted. The sunlight glinting on the polished floor, the hum of the city outside, the soft creak of the living room sofa. All seemed imbued with new significance. He realized that life, even in its ordinary rhythms, carried subtle lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the tenuous nature of human connection. Evelyn, too, had changed in small but meaningful ways. She approached conversations with Daniel with a level of openness previously absent, allowing herself to express needs, fears, and desires without the defensive walls that had once been her refuge. The honesty that had once shattered their sense of stability now acted as a bridge, creating pathways for understanding and empathy. Despite their progress, the consequences of her actions remained tangible. Friends and extended family had become aware, subtly or overtly, of the secret trip and its implications. There were moments of judgment, whispered speculation, and social awkwardness that neither could entirely ignore. Yet Daniel and Evelyn faced these realities together, choosing to prioritize the integrity of their private reconciliation over public perception. The societal expectations that had long guided their choices, the pressure to maintain appearances, to project stability, to conform to ideals of marital perfection, had lost some of their power. They had learned that authenticity, though costly, offered a depth of connection that appearances never could. The children, aware of tension and subtle shifts in household dynamics, became both observers and participants in this process. Their curiosity, concern, and questions forced Daniel and Evelyn to articulate values, lessons, and boundaries they had previously assumed were implicit. Through these interactions, the couple began to model resilience, accountability, and the complexities of adult relationships, showing that even imperfect adults could confront mistakes and strive for growth. Professionally, Daniel found that the emotional clarity he had gained through confrontation extended to his work life. He approached decisions with a measured patience, a recognition that human relationships, whether personal or professional, required attention, understanding, and careful cultivation. The revelation had left scars, yes, but it had also illuminated the interplay between vulnerability and strength, between honesty and responsibility. The Vegas trip, while painful in its aftermath, had acted as a catalyst for deep introspection, forcing her to confront what she truly wanted from her life and her marriage. She understood that the choices she had made, while imperfect, could be transformed into lessons for the future.
One evening, months after the initial revelation, Daniel and Evelyn sat together on their balcony, overlooking the twinkling lights of Las Vegas. A cool breeze swept through the space, carrying the faint hum of traffic and distant laughter from the strip. Daniel reached for Evelyn's hand, feeling the warmth, the familiar texture, and the small scars of time and experience etched into her skin. I never thought we'd get here, he said quietly, his voice reflective. Not without some irreparable damage. Evelyn smiled, a mixture of relief, acceptance, and lingering remorse in her expression. We're not the same people we were, and we'll never forget, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that we're here, together, trying. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. They had confronted the past, endured the storm, and faced the consequences of their choices. The path forward was not free of pain, nor was it free of uncertainty, but it was defined by intentionality and mutual effort. They had chosen to act with honesty, to acknowledge their humanity, and to embrace the intricate, often contradictory nature of love. In the weeks that followed, they continued to navigate life with newfound awareness. Simple moments, a shared meal, a quiet conversation, a gentle touch, carried profound significance. They celebrated small victories, days without tension, conversations that ended in understanding rather than conflict, and mutual acknowledgement of growth. The trust they were rebuilding was not naive, it was deliberate, fragile, and ever-evolving. Yet the consequences of past choices persisted in subtle ways. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, moments of doubt threatened to undermine progress, and the specter of betrayal lingered in fleeting, unspoken ways. But Daniel and Evelyn had developed tools to confront these moments: communication, reflection, and shared accountability. They learned that reconciliation was not a destination, but an ongoing process, an effort that required vigilance, courage, and compassion. Ultimately, the resolution was not a clean erasure of mistakes, but a profound engagement with them. Daniel and Evelyn recognized that love was not defined solely by perfection or absence of betrayal, but by the capacity to confront hardship, embrace vulnerability, and act with intentionality in the face of human imperfection. The consequences of Evelyn's hidden Vegas trip, while painful, had catalyzed a deeper understanding of themselves and each other, a clarity that might never have emerged without the disruption. As they watched the neon lights reflect off the horizon, Daniel and Evelyn Harper held hands quietly, their fingers intertwined like the intricate threads of their shared history. The journey ahead remained uncertain, filled with both challenges and possibilities. But for the first time in decades, they faced the future with eyes wide open, aware of the fragility of trust, the weight of choices, and the enduring potential for growth, intimacy, and love. In the end, the resolution was neither perfect nor painless. It was human. It was hard-earned. And it was, in its own complex, imperfect way, real.